Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to an album ranking for the band Smashing Pumpkins, one of the biggest bands out of the 90s, mixing everything in from alternative rock, grunge, hard rock, electronica, all into one thing, making quite an interesting, unique sound that is all just the Smashing Pumpkins. And since the band just released their brand new album, Atum, a rock opera in 3 parts, it's a triple album. It just came out on May 5th of 2023. I thought it'd be a good time to do a countdown of all 12 of the band's studio albums. We'll get started in that in just a bit here, but before we do, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on really cool videos just like this with the Smashing Pumpkins and an album ranking of all 12 of their studio albums. So, kicking off at number 12, we're going to get right into it here. Adore, 1998, 4th studio album from the band at the time. This one here was a much more subdued effort than previous albums and had a whole electronica tinge to it and everything. And for me at least, it just didn't fit with what I expected from the band at the time. And I know the same was true for a lot of fans. Although, conversely, there were plenty of fans who really loved this album, certainly. But I think it had a lot to do with the fact that Jimmy Chamberlin, their drummer, wasn't involved in this album here, and he had always brought that harder drumming edge to the band, taking them into the more rock territory than certainly when he has not been involved in the band. It just ultimately never clicked for me. Gone were the characteristic elements of the things that I fell in love with the band on their previous album, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness in 1995. So for me at least, this has just been one that I've never really fully enjoyed and why it's coming in last place. Okay, number 11, Seer from 2020, 11th studio album from the band. This one here, a concept album, as many of theirs are. In fact, I've going back, finding out and realizing that lots of their albums have underlying themes and stories and that sort of stuff. But here's one here. It was a double album that was released on a single CD, and that's always bugged me a little bit. If it's going to be a double album, put it on 2 separate discs. But this one here was the band attempting to go in a modern direction, although for me it really heavily focuses on synth pop, which reminds me of the 80s, although, you know, everything old is new again kind of thing. So maybe that was the idea behind this being a modern effort. But also, you know, because of the more electronic drum sounds and things of that nature, even though Jimmy Chamberlin is involved in this, it just fell a little flat for me. And in all, I end up losing interest on this one very quickly, and it just doesn't hold out over like the rest of the albums and things does, which is why this one comes in at number 11. Okay, coming in at number 10, Zeitgeist from 2007, their 7th studio album. It was a reunion album at the time, although it only featured 2 original band members, frontman Billy Corgan and drummer Jimmy Chamberlin. And while the album itself was, you know, welcomed at the time and I did very much enjoy it and whatnot, I've just found that over the years none of the tracks have really stuck with me the way that at least first single Tarantula did. And I think had more of the songs on here been like that first single, probably would have ranked a bit higher in my you know, countdown as a whole. And so I end up still going back to this one though more than I do Adore from 98 and Seer from 2020. So this one just had a bit more of that classic sound than those two, which is why it comes in where it does. All right, number 9. Shiny and Oh So Bright from 2018, 10th studio album. It was a reunion album that featured the return of James Iha on guitar, Jimmy Chamberlin coming back in again at this point here. We already had Billy Corgan, of course, in the lineup. Darcy chose not to reunite with them, so it's just the core 3 members there. Produced by Rick Rubin, and I honestly would expect a lot more from a Rick Rubin produced album. It was originally intended to be 2 EPs, but they later decided to gather up the tracks and release it as an album, which I think is a better effort in and of itself to come out as an album than as EPs. But even Billy Corgan said this is not a real album in the sense that they just went into the studio to see what they could do. They didn't set out with a conscious effort to write an album, and consequently I kind of think that's why the songs sound the way they do, and in my opinion they're not as memorable as they could be as some of their other great albums. But I still like this one. Okay, coming in at number 8, Moments to an Elegy from 2014, 9th studio album. It was considered an album within an album, as there was a 44-song Tiergarten by Kaleidoscope project that Billy Corgan was working on. It was later abandoned, but it was a series of EPs and individual songs that were being released one at a time to the internet, to where ultimately when they got up to the 44, it would all be gathered up and released as this album, Tiergarten by Kaleidoscope. But since they decided to record an album, at this time being Moments to an Elegy, that's why it is an album within an album, because Tiergarten by Kaleidoscope was supposed to be a 44-song album, and you got this one in it. Regardless, though, this one here was recorded as a duo of just Billy Corgan and Jeff Schroeder, his guitar player, who's now been part of the band even with the reunion lineup and whatnot. But what was interesting is the drums on here were handled by Tommy Lee of Motley Crue. And while that really seems like an odd fit, it actually ended up working out quite well, bringing that more rock element to the band that, again, I always feel is missing when Jimmy Chamberlin is not involved. All right, next one up, number 7, Oceana from 2012, 8th studio album from the band. Again, considered an album within an album, because this too was part of the 44-song Tiergarten by Kaleidoscope project. This was the first album to feature guitarist Jeff Schroeder in the band here, which I think he really helped the band grow by leaps and bounds coming into the group. And the shorter album format, meaning going from a 44-song album down to this one here, I think helped a lot. It made this album in and of itself a lot stronger, with them focusing on that as opposed to the way they were working on the project previous to this. It features one of my all-time favorite songs by the band, The Celestials, so that's one of the reasons I love this one so much. All right, coming in at number 6 is actually the band's newest album to date, Atum, a rock opera in 3 acts from 2023. Just came out on May 5th. I've been digesting this thing quite a bit here and really, really enjoying it. 12th studio album overall, triple album. Each album features 11 songs on it, so 33 tracks total. According to Billy Corgan, though, this is a sequel to a trilogy of albums that started with Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness in 95 and Machine and the Machines of God in 2000, and it continues the story of Zero and Glass, with the character now being much older, going by the name Shiny. The album itself, in my opinion, merges the more modern synth-pop sounds that Smashing Pumpkins had moved into in the last decade or so, but it also returns the more hard rock guitar-driven sound that we know them for from the 90s. And I think you kind of get the best of both worlds. It is also, in my opinion, the best album since the reunion lineups of either era of the band itself, whether we've got James Iha in on this or not. This is some really good stuff here, and I highly recommend it. I have done a full review of the album, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. Okay, coming in at number 5, Machina, the Machines of God from 2000, 5th studio album from the band. This one here featured the return of drummer Jimmy Chamberlin. And so, as I mentioned back at the beginning of this with the album Adore and why I felt that that album just didn't hit the mark, we've got him returning here. And yes, he brought that hard edge drumming sound that I think allows the band to go in a much heavier direction. One of the things I've always loved about Smashing Pumpkins. The album still has a very modern feel to it, but it is a return of sorts after Adore, getting them back to that rockin' sound and the heaviness and everything. Album opener, the track Everlasting Gaze on here, I think is one of the best songs they ever did. And the sequel to the album itself, which also features the original lineup of the band, ended up being the final one, both of these together, because they released at the same time of that lineup. Okay, coming in at number 4, we've got Machina II, The Friends and Enemies of Modern Music, and it's actually was a 4 LP set, because that's how it was done and released. I'll talk about it in just a second, but we basically have the EPs gathered up and the LPs gathered up, and that's what you're seeing with that artwork there. 6th studio album, and of course sequel to the 5th studio album, Machina, The Machines of God. Both albums were released at the same time, but Machina II was a big FU to the record labels. As I said, issued on 4 LPs, but given out to fans and told to upload to the internet for free. The band promptly broke up right after this came out, and just kind of a weird way to culminate, topping off the 90s the way that they did. But this album here, in my opinion, is even better than the first Machina album. I've always really liked this one. And what's interesting is it's never had an official release, but in 2018, Billy Corgan said that he had actually cleared all the hurdles to re-release this as part of the Machina box set, although we've yet to see that. So hopefully we are going to see that, where this album will finally get an official release for all you Smashing Pumpkin fans that have never had the luck of hearing it just yet. Okay, coming in at number 3, Gish from 1991, the debut studio album from the band. The thing is, though, this is, or considering that Billy Corgan plays all the instruments on here except the drums, for me at least, I've never really felt this is the first Smashing Pumpkins album in true form. It would be the follow-up album, Siamese Dream. But that being said, ultimately that's kind of the way Smashing Pumpkins became, with Billy Corgan running everything and so forth. So really, I guess not that far off from things. But Billy says that the attempt of this album was a balance between classic rock like Led Zeppelin and alternative rock bands like The Cure, and I really think that he succeeded in that here, and just a great way to kick off the legacy that is the Smashing Pumpkins. Coming in at number 2, Siamese Dream from 1993, their 2nd studio album. My first album that I picked up from the band, in their breakout album, having 4 huge hits that came off of this thing at the time, with Cherub Rock, Today, Disarm, Rocket. But for me at least, it's the album as a whole. I love this album from start to finish. There's no bad tracks on this thing. It's just got such fire and intensity all the way through this thing, and it's just one of the best albums of the decade, in my opinion. All right, the number 1 album by the Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness from 1995. 3rd studio album, double album featuring 28 tracks. It was lauded for its ambition and scope at the time. And I remember as a kid getting this thing and just being blown away at having so much new music from my favorite band, Smashing Pumpkins. And it featured a wide array of different styles and things, really expanding what it is that we knew Smashing Pumpkins as a band to be at that time. The album itself spawned some real mega hits that were seemingly everywhere in 95, 96, that time frame. Bullet with Butterfly Wings, Zero, 1979, Tonight Tonight. The album itself, in my opinion, because of that, just the seemingly everywhereness of this thing, should have been called Zeitgeist for its ability to have captured a moment in time. I really think that's what this album did. Of course, they used that title much later in our reunion album, but this one here really captures that era of the 90s, in my opinion, and why it is the number 1 Smashing Pumpkins album on my album ranking. All right, so there you go. That is the Smashing Pumpkins album ranking, all 12 of their studio albums, including their newest one, Atum, a rock opera in 3 acts. As I said, I did a full review of that, and I will leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. Now, I'm sure you guys have your own run through and which album should be at the top. Some of you guys probably even want Adore in the number 1 spot, and that's okay. We all have our favorites. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.